introduce them to you, which is what we're going to do today with an intro to the response planning module, or RPM. So RPM addresses two parts of the HPC. The first is the development of a humanitarian response plan, and the second is managing data around targets. And this is just one part of OCHA's effort to build information systems that manage data around the entire program cycle. So we can do less ad hoc development of tools and have a lot more predictable data. So in the session, Nick Imboden will just give you a high-level overview of the work that they're doing. Then Anwar will do a demo of the platform, and Mark will discuss the rollout and what kind of support you can expect from headquarters. If you have any questions during the session, please write them into the chat window as we go. Some of them our colleagues will address during the presentations, and then we'll have some time at the end to address anything that's outstanding. So with that, I will hand over to Nick.
Thanks, Craig, and welcome everyone. It's great to have so many of you online. So as Craig said, we've been working on various tools to support the HPC, and this is very much in response to, or in recognition of, all of the work that you guys in the field are doing on a day-to-day basis, and the fact that essentially we switched from the old CAP way of doing things to the HPC way, now several years ago, and it's now well established. I think all of you are very familiar with, the process of doing an HNO, and then the process of doing an HRP, and then the subsequent periodic monitoring. The periodic monitoring is a little newer, but nevertheless, the fact is that you guys know how to do these things in the field, and what we really now miss is the upgraded and new and improved tools that really help you and support you in that work. And that's why a lot of you have been, developing some very good ad hoc tools, which is what we love to see, because I always say that the best innovation in OCHA comes from the field, and that's undoubtedly true, especially for information management. But our job at headquarters is essentially to look at all of these innovations and to come up behind offering, stable, scalable platforms and tools that we can then use everywhere in the world. Also, so that the countries who may not have such a high capacity can benefit from, innovations and good ideas coming out from other countries. So that's the purpose of our work. I'm going to share some slides with you quickly. Let me just share my desktop. Here we go. Just to introduce the project very, very quickly. So what we have done essentially is to break down the HPC into various different modules. And the purpose of this is because, well, the HPC has many different elements, but also because we needed to be able to do this one after another. And most of you will be aware that, for example, we launched a new financial tracking service earlier on this year, a couple of months ago. And that's been so far the main focus of our work, is to improve the financial tracking element of our management of the HPC data universe. What we're talking about today, on the other hand, is the response planning and monitoring element, what you can see here on the top right. And just to explain, there is two more pieces of the puzzle that are coming towards us over the course of the next year, year and a half. The one at the bottom right in green is the project planning and implementation tracking module, which will replace the existing OPS. And we're just starting work on that, and we'll be coming back to you at some other point of time in the not too distant future to talk more about that. And then eventually also we will be looking at improving the support for ongoing needs and situation monitoring. So all in all, the idea is that we can develop systems and services that support every aspect of the HPC, but that actually connect fluidly and seamlessly to each other. So instead of having standalone systems and services, we'll have these different modules, but underneath it, you'll have a common database and a common data architecture which supports all of this. And that is for obvious reasons. What we need to do is to be able to improve how we manage this data. And we need to improve essentially to join the dots between all of these different data that we're managing. And at the moment, a lot of you are doing that manually when you create your dashboards and you take some financial data here and you take some monitoring data over there and some 3W data and so on. But all of this data is actually already connected, and we should be able to connect it when we collect it from our partners and when we manage it. And these tools and services are designed for us to be able to improve the collection and the management of this kind of information. So we'll be using these kinds of tools to get information from our information providers. That means you guys, but it also means all of the people in the clusters and in the agencies who participate in the HPC processes, as well as external systems. So a major focus of this work is to link what we're doing together with what the clusters are doing. For example, some clusters are taking the lead in developing cluster-level management systems for their data, for their monitoring, and so on. And we want to ensure that we can seamlessly exchange data at cluster level. No one needs to ever enter data more than once, regardless. At the end of HR, so that you can continue to do all of the work that you do in the field. So many of you are using, yes. Oh, great. Nothing. I haven't literally not touched anything. Hang on. Hang on. Sorry, there's audio problems.
Nick, can you speak, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, you're coming back now.
Okay, all right.
No, that's extremely indistinct. Okay, Christian is saying that he's hearing you, so why don't we just resume?
Okay, all right. I'm sorry about that. So as I was saying, the idea is to empower any information consumer to do what they want with this data, and that includes you guys when you're doing your cool dashboards on Tableau or on Power BI, that you can link directly into the APIs that we're providing in order to dynamically update your products in real time. So moving on, this is the timeline of the project so far, and as you can see, we kicked off this work in 2015. Our main focus initially was on improving FTS, and we launched a new website at the end of 2015 and a new database that hopefully most of you are now using or familiar with at the beginning of this year. And at the same time, we were busy piloting the tool that we are talking about today, the response planning and monitoring tool. We piloted that in Palestine, the planning part of it in 2015 and the monitoring part of it in 2016. So what we have today is actually a fully piloted and improved version that is ready for rollout all over the world because we know that it works. We've already integrated a huge amount of feedback to ensure that it meets your needs, and we know that it's stable enough to be used. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we're stopping the development here. The development is always going to be iterative, which means that as we roll it out, we're going to constantly be collecting feedback from everyone in order to improve the tool as we go along. And you can see here also that for our replacement of the OPS system, we're working on that right now to be piloting that later on this year, and then we'll be rolling it out globally in 2018. So, to talk specifically about the RPM, this response planning and monitoring tool is designed to support the management of the strategic framework. So all of you are familiar with the fact that at the heart of an HRP there is a strategic framework made up of strategic objectives and various clusters with cluster objectives and activities. Now, this plan may look different from one country to the next, and the structure of the plan may look different from one country to the next, which is why RPM is completely flexible. But generally speaking, every plan does have some form of framework or log frame, and the idea is that we can support both the creation of that log frame and then subsequently throughout the year, the monitoring of all of the indicators and caseloads and information that you've attached to that log frame. Why are we doing this? Well, we want to make sure that we can reduce the workload involved in managing an HPC process, that you guys can spend less time working on templates and making calls to get data and cleaning and validating it. We want to make it much easier to be able to share information, so that we're essentially digitizing a process that most of you are currently doing in platforms like Excel or in Word, where we can't really use this data afterwards effectively, and we can't connect it to other platforms. So that will free up a lot of your time that you can better use to focus on an analysis and evaluation of data rather than servicing ad hoc requests. We're going to be developing or further improving. You can really see what we've done in a second, but we're going to be working on even making it even better to see how you can then really use and showcase this data. So many of you are familiar with some of the microsites that some countries have developed to showcase their HNOs or their response plans. The idea is that this tool will actually create microsites like that automatically once you've entered all of the data and information for it, so that you can benefit from those kinds of tools even if you're in a lower capacity context. In unlocking this data, we can also make sure that we can connect this platform seamlessly to all of these other systems that are out there, whether it's the eTool system that UNICEF are currently developing or Activity Info, which some of you use, so that not only do we never have to enter information twice, but we can also ensure that the cluster coordinators and the partner agencies never have to enter information twice. So there's a huge potential here to significantly reduce workloads and to do a lot more with our data. The final point on why this is so important, of course, is that we really do need to standardize. It's not a good situation to have every country using their own tools and services. First of all, these tools are different from one country to the next, so we can't necessarily use them in other places because they're so context specifically. Secondly, it makes a lot harder when you move from one operation to the next, or when we need to set up a new response to a sudden onset emergency. If there are no tools that we can use that are ready to go, that people already know how to use, that are available and applicable to these kinds of situations. So clearly, standardization is a huge benefit, providing we can do so preserving the flexibility that you guys need to adapt the tools to the specific context. And this is exactly what's at the heart of the RPM, standardized approaches, but with full flexibility to make sure that it's never the tool telling you what you need to do, and it's always you guys and the HCTs deciding that you're going to be structuring the HPC like this, and then the tool enables that. So I'm going to stop there. I'll be saying a little bit more about rollout plans after Anwar talks, but now I'd like to hand over to Anwar to actually give you a little bit of a taste of what the platform looks like.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just sharing my desktop now. Great. So, hello, everybody. I'd just like to share a little bit of background about the platform itself, and take you through some of the features of the platform, and also, get a chance to give you a sense of what RPM does and how it can be of value in terms of your field environment, wherever you are. Now, one of the things that I would like to first start with is the fact that the positioning of RPM basically in your work. So what RPM would do basically, it's going to help you collect data from clusters. And it will not be able to, it's not a platform that you would use to collect project level data, for example. I think this is a very important distinction, because for you to understand before we proceed in the presentation itself. So the first thing is that, you have a number of platforms. Some of them, in terms of monitoring, they are focused on collecting data directly from partners for projects. And you have other platforms whereby you're collecting data from cluster coordinators on monitoring or on 3Ws and things like that. Now, OCHA's mandate primarily in terms of the ask guidance, it's focused on interagency data collection. So in terms of information management, we are focused on that, and RPM basically supports you to collect monitoring data on the platforms. Now, if you look at my screen right now, this is the current interface of RPM. So RPM is already integrated with humanitarian ID, and that means that anybody who has humanitarian ID access would be able to access not just RPM, but also all the HPC tools, including FTS and the new OPX and the others, which are already integrated on this platform. Now, what I would like to start with is take you back to the strategic framework that Nick mentioned before in his presentation. So ideally, you can see from here that the standard template that we have right now, the HRP, you have your strategic objectives, cluster objectives, and then going down to the activities and the indicators. Now, this is the template for most of the country offices out there, but we do know as well that this is not exactly the current case, because you have some offices that go for a different flexible framework of how it's done. We have similar cases, for example, in OPT, where you have cluster objectives are not present. So in a case like this one, for example, where you have strategic objectives linked directly to cluster activities and indicators, or you have different types of cases like this one, where you have strategic objectives linked to a cluster objectives and then going forward to a cluster activity and indicators. So the way the strategic framework itself is structured depends on the requirements at the field level. Now, what we've done is we've basically taken a look at this, and we realized that it's quite difficult for us to develop a platform that would meet the flexibility of each and every country, for example. So what we decided to do in the end is we decided to delegate the role of how the user interface will be created to something more flexible, like a JSON model. So what we are doing basically is, when you are creating your plan, we basically are going to be asking you a number of questions, like, how would you like the plan to be structured? We do have the basic standard platform template, and how yours would be varying from the standard template right now. And we would create something like a JSON model like this. This is something that we would do from our side. You don't have to be involved in this. And what we would do is we would pretty much talk about, what exactly the structure is, what kind of entities you would need, whether they're cluster objectives, strategic objectives. It also depends on any type of plan or framework that you might have. For example, case in point, if you are working in an Ebola emergency where you don't have strategic objectives, you have pillars, for example, and then you have, the work around the different pillars or things like that. And you can also put in, validation and how these combinations are going ahead. So with this, once we select this in the plan, you end up creating this nice little wizard up here where it meets your, specific requirements for the plan. And that's exactly what we aim to do, which has taken us, to a level where RPM can basically support any form of strategic framework. It could be, a monitoring framework. It could be a framework to monitor, any type of an emergency, a flash appeal, or any other, monitoring strategic framework, including, administrative things and all that. So the flexibility is really great. And this is one of the things that we really like to, put forward out there, that now we are able to, meet any specific requirements with this flexible structure. Now, the UI itself, the way we've built it is the fact that we realize that the tool has to be used in the field. And this is the reason why we went into this wizard format, whereby, a user would just go, click from one tab to the other one as they go ahead and fill in their details, so that they don't get lost anyway. We don't have to have, drop downs where they forget to click a button and then we have to make a lot of calls here and there and things like that. This makes it really, really easy for them to just move around the platform itself. Now, I'd like to take you through the platform itself. So ideally, there's parts of this plan which would be done by people in Geneva, the HQ. So when we set up the plan, just like the way we launched the OPS, for example, plan for the country, some things like the plan details will be created from this side. And then from there, the IM person, who is the plan lead at the country level, would be delegated, to have rights to continue with the rest. So for example, things like locations. So what this platform does, for example, is it allows you to provide a location. You can provide, the plan can be for a specific country. You can add more than one country on the plan. You can decide to do the plan for specific locations, including admin 2s or admin 1s, depending on what you want. So you have flexibility in terms of how you want to manage the locations. So a plan can be regional, country-specific, or just custom, meaning any country or any specific geographical location can be monitored by the plan. The other thing is then you go ahead and do your monitoring period. So how do you want to monitor your data? We know that many cases the PMR is done at a quarterly level, but we do also know that many people have different requirements. Some people might want to use RPM for, weekly collection of data, monthly collection of data, yearly, or in some cases you just don't know and you just want to have some custom dates, like daily and things like that. So all this is available. So all you have to do is click there and you populate your periods, and you have your periods there with your dates. And you can also actually put in some expiry dates to incentivize your clusters and the people you're collecting data from to provide data on time. We do know, for example, in the field that people always like to do things last minute. So if they do know that the system will automatically lock them out by this day, then chances are they get a little bit motivated to give you the data. And if not, of course, you can always extend and ask them to do it for the following day or things like that. So this is there, and it's just optional for you if you actually need it, but you don't actually have to use it. The other thing is the disaggregation model, which I think is one of the great things that we've done as well. Now, what this does is basically allows you to create the disaggregation model from your side. Now, there are some countries that do disaggregation in different ways. Some, you have one model, which is, age, sex, and maybe population type. And others do one model for a specific cluster, or others do, different models for each cluster. So this becomes a little bit different. I'm going to just click a little bit here to take you through like a simple way of how you would create it. So you just create your own model. The first thing is you would identify what kind of disaggregation you would need. So the platform supports up to all admin levels that you would like to monitor, for example. You don't have any restrictions on that. At the moment, we're picking all the P codes from HR Info. The idea that we would move this to the ITOS API as quickly as possible once it's ready for those countries. So for example, if I pick admin 1 and 2s, you can also import custom admin locations by using this tab here. You can create those. And then you would come to the second stage where you would set your categories for disaggregation. So for example, you would say age and gender, for example. Now, you can choose to have it as, listed as children, elderly, adults, male and female, or you can say, well, I want them as combinations, which means it's children male, children female, and things like that. So if you say, for example, combinations, you will see it's combining this for you, and then you can change it if you would like to see it in a different way on your tab. So you can also, identify it by a specific cluster name. This you can change, and then you can save it. So it creates for you this nice little matrix here, which resembles an Excel sheet embedded on a, HTML, and then you can actually save it. So you can create as many as possible here, one per cluster, a number of them, different permutations. You can activate, as a plan lead in your office, you can activate them or deactivate them, meaning if you only have one activated, and then you lock the clusters from creating models, then that means they will be only using that model. So it works whether flexibly, whether you have restrictions in place within, as agreed within the interagency context, or if there are no restrictions and you want to use an open way of doing this. The next step is for you then to create, your plan entities. So this, for example, is where you have a strategic objective linked to a cluster objective and then activities. You might have more than that, less than that, depending on the structure of your plan. So you just fill in, your strategic objectives, and then go down and provide your indicators. You provide your units there, and then you put in your in-need, baseline, and targets. I mean, this, again, is just directly from the structure of the HRP standard template. What this flexible model that we have does is, if a country decides, well, we don't want to use baseline, for example, or we want to add an additional field here for a different type of target, we can do that. So this is totally flexible in terms of the fields, and the JSON model that we have enables us to manage that very, very accurately. From here, if you want to add a disaggregation, you just click on disaggregation, and then you're able to, see the model that you created in a nice way. So you can put in your targets here, and you're done with the setting up of the indicator. So that's more or less what you have here. And then you can also go to the next step of setting up your clusters. So preparing, for example, for strategic objectives, setting up the disaggregation models, the monitoring periods. This is the work of the OCHA IMO. And then also setting up the clusters. So we know the clusters that are there. You just pick the icon for the specific cluster. You create it. You add, after this one, you add the contact of the cluster coordinator, for example. Yeah. Ideally, we would like to pick this from HID soon, but at the moment, you can just put it in there. You can add more than one contact if you actually have to do that. If you feel that you need more than one or something like that, it's possible for us to accommodate that. And then you would move into the next step, which is now putting in your cluster objectives if you have them there, and also linking those to the strategic objectives and all that. So with the activities, it follows the same logic again. All you have to do is put in your activities, tick whether your activity supports the strategic objective or the cluster objectives, and then put in the indicator for that specific cluster. So the logic, it follows the same logic so that the user doesn't feel, oh, this is something new, I've never seen this before. So and it creates quite a really good way of doing it. Now I'd like to go to this part where I'm going to show what exactly comes out of the plan. So once you've done the plan itself, you would go to the outputs of the plan. Now, what exactly do you get from it? We have a number of things that we have right now, which we've been working on. So one of them is the viewer. The RPM viewer is basically, a microsite lookalike kind of way in which you would view the data. Ideally, we consider this quite basic for now because of the version that we have, but we are actually right now working with user interface designer, plus also working with the guys in VMU to make sure that some of the dashboards and standard templates for the monitoring stuff that we've seen out there from the different countries are there. So you would have a set of fields that are pretty common on how somebody would want his dashboard to look like, and you can pick those from that template and add them onto your dashboard to fit your needs. For example, if you like to show data for planning and monitoring one only, or you want to pick data for monitoring as of today, which means you've done maybe 2 or 3 monitoring periods. So you'll be able to do that, and you'll be able to view a little bit of graphs and things like that without you going into Adobe InDesign and doing all that stuff by yourself. So this is one of the things. And you can have this link public and share it with anybody. You can embed it in any of your, other websites if you have HR info or something like that. So this is totally ready and for you to use. The other thing we have here is the XLS import. So now you can actually export all that data that you have in XLS, right? So you have that, you have it here with your specific entities that are there, and the indicators, you have your units, your calculation methods, and the baseline as well as the measurement data. And then you have the disaggregation data put for you tab by tab as required. So that's the other thing. The other thing, which is also, something that is really being used by many officers these days, is a JSON export of this data. Now, a JSON export allows you not only to just get the structure of the plan, but also allows you to get that data. So once you import this in your plan, you're easily able to import the data that you have into, external visualization platforms. So I know most of you, for example, have invested quite a lot of time on developing some, third-party apps to visualize the data, Tableau, for example, or Power BI and things like that. And then the other thing I would like to mention is also the HPC API. So initially, you're familiar with this from the FTS, but now if you go all the way to the bottom, we have actually enhanced this a little bit and added some stuff on the planning side. So you would see here that it gives you a number of options now. One of them is for you to get, a basic plan listing, if you would just like to get a list of the plan lists as the way you see them on this page, for example, just by listing. The other thing is it gives you the plan structure. So it will just give you the plan entities one by one and the attachments, the indicators, caseloads, and things like that. And the other one is it will give you the plan structure also with the data. Now, why this is important is if you're linking the platform to, third-party applications for your visualizations, you can use this to automatically import your data into your Excel files if you have those, or you can use this, to push this data from RPM into any other platforms. Yeah. I'm just going to look at here on some of the questions now. Just a second. Going to the chat. Let's see. Yeah, I see a question here from Christian about calculation methods, right? Yeah, so Christian, one of the questions that you're asking is about the types of indicators. Yes, so we do have different types of indicators. That's definitely correct. One of the things we're trying to do, and we're trying to expand RPM, is that it's not used just for, monitoring response type of indicators. We have already incorporated, different types of indicators and different types of measurements. So one of the things you can also measure from RPM is already humanitarian caseloads. So you can, monitor, your numbers of people affected, reached, and targeted. Ideally, we're also working right now on expanding this to have different sets of indicators, similar to what we were working on back in the Sahel on ORS on key figures, where you can put and collect data on things like, MAM, SAM figures for nutrition and things like that. And we have, at the moment, incorporated, with the flexible fields that we have, we are able to tag indicators to different calculation methods. So what we don't do right away right now is that at the moment, with this viewer, we still don't do the measurements on the viewer. But if you are using calculation methods for your indicators and you would like to, the cluster, when they're putting the indicators to tag that, it's possible for it to be done right now. And we already explored this with the Sahel countries. At the moment, we did some tests with the Mali plans, and that works pretty well so far. Just looking again if there are any other questions or things that I might go into before I hand you over. Okay, great. I don't see anything else, but what I would like to mention here is the key thing about this whole platform is that this is just a part of the bigger scope of the project that we're doing. This viewer here at the moment is the RPM plan viewer. Our plan is to expand this a little bit better and make it into something much better. We're going to put, maps here so that you're able to sort of navigate the data and get the story behind the data in an easier way, more like a microsite. We are going to integrate the plan data with financial data from FTS, and also add some kind of project data from OPS once the new OPS is ready. Now, something else that I know that most of you might be concerned about is the issue of, how do we tag plan structures or cluster frameworks with projects? So RPM does not help you to collect data from project partners. So you cannot do project tracking. But what it can do is it can possibly, one of the potential that it has is allow you to tag the plans, because we already have here, for example, if you look at this, we do have, the cluster plans here, which lists for us the activities for the specific clusters, for example, right? So with this, it will be possible for you to be able to go to, say, OPS, click on the project, and then add or tag specific activities on the plan with specific projects, which will form the basis of the 3W. So the idea is that the RPM would give you this framework or this structure that you can pull from here into, either a cluster tool that you have, which could be, an ORS or an eTools or any other, platform that you have. And then the clusters would use that as a basis for them to now go to the partners and collect that data, because it's already linked with the different activities they're working on, and it's also linked to the different organizations. So while it doesn't give you this project tracking level by inputting of the data, it can support you to actually get that structure going. And that's what we're trying to do. And the plan is to go through that. Possibly we would be able to do that by the next planning season. I'm just going through the chat again here. I have a question from Himayun. Can the system produce a dashboard at the click of a button? At the moment, this is the dashboard that we have, the plan viewer. We are, as I mentioned, working with Akiko and some of the developers here, the UI, to design something that, is scalable, because we also do know that, analysis requirements for different offices are different. And working from, a headquarter perspective, we do need to make sure that we can allow, the most complex emergencies be able to do their dashboard, but also allow the simplest ones also to do theirs. So we need to come up with to be very creative in terms of how we do this. And we're already looking at, ways of how this is possible. So this is definitely coming in the next, I would say, very, very few months. And it's something that we're working on in terms of the design as we speak. Another question from Christian here. Gender markers. How do we mark a sector plan? Yeah, so this is something I would leave to Nick maybe to point out. I'm not sure where we are on the gender marker issue. I think it's possible for us to add any fields here in terms of gender markers. I think this would ideally be on the project side, but maybe Nick could correct me if I'm wrong. And then send for protection, mainstreaming, and sensitive marker. Yeah, so it's possible to tag indicators to specific priority or categories. If you look at the plan itself here, if I could click on this window and go back here, just a second. You can be able, it's possible for you to basically create any type of, drop downs on this platform. This is totally flexible. So you could say, drop down 1 and say D1. You can add it, something like that. D2, sorry. And you are able to, move things a little bit from one. You can drag this up and down depending on how you would like to look at. And you can put this in whichever plan entity or at what point you would like to have that. So it's totally scalable and flexible. So in terms of tagging things to specific, priorities, or say if you want to add prioritization or tagging plans or activities to specific things, it's possible to do that. Okay, so I'd like to hand you over back to Nick, and I will be answering the questions on the chat. If you have any, please keep punching them there. I'm going to be texting you back. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Anwar. So what I want to do in the last 20 minutes of this webinar is to focus less on the technical details of the platform, because we are absolutely ready to give you much more detailed demonstrations and to give you access to our demo site so you can play around with it yourself. Rather than spending the next 20 minutes on that, I'd rather focus on some of the rollout plans that we have. So throughout this, as Anwar said, just keep your questions coming on the chat window. So our rollout plans, basically, we're doing a lot in addition to just talking to you. In many ways, you guys are the most important people to us, because you're at the front line of doing this work, practically every day. And because you have most loudly and clearly expressed the need for this kind of support and these kinds of platforms. But at the same time, what we really want to do is enable not just you guys and the IMOs, your IMO colleagues in the clusters, but also the cluster focal points, the HPC focal points in the OCHA offices, the HAOs, and the cluster coordinators and so on in the clusters themselves. We want to enable and empower them to also use these kinds of systems and tools without always having to resort to IMO assistance. And we also want to make sure that the use of this kind of platform enjoys a lot of political buy-in and support from everyone, because without that, it doesn't matter how good it is technically or how useful it is, we really need everyone to be behind it. So at the same time as talking to you, we're also making sure that OCHA senior management is completely on board, and we're talking to all of the CRD section chiefs and the desk officers, and we'll be talking also to your heads of office and to your HAO focal points. But we also encourage you, especially once you've had an opportunity to look at the platform in more detail, to talk about it in your own country offices. So this way we have sort of both a simultaneous bottom-up and a top-down approach to actually get the word out there and to discuss this. We are here in Geneva also talking a lot with the global clusters to make sure that we have them on board, so that they don't just understand fully what we're doing, but that we're doing, so when they're developing their tools that they are intending to roll out to all of their clusters in the field, they're doing so together with us, so that, first of all, the tools do slightly different things. We focus on the intercluster management of data, and they focus on cluster-specific stuff. And secondly, we can seamlessly exchange data between the different platforms. Again, it's not just technical, it's political, so that we get the buy-in from the clusters at the political level, so that they see the added value of what we're doing. What we want to ensure is that eventually all OCHA country offices are using this suite of tools and services. So just as everyone uses FTS, or currently everyone uses the old OPS, these are tools that are intended to be used by all offices. But the rollout is going to be gradual, and exactly when and how we do it will be worked out for each country individually, depending on what your needs are, what you're currently doing, the level of buy-in and support that you have from the different clusters, the capacity you have, etc., etc. So we're not going to be, charging in saying you have to switch to use this tool immediately, but we are going to be there to hold your hands to make sure that the transition works smoothly. What we're aiming is to get as many countries on board as soon as possible. So there's sort of two big choices that can be made. Either to adopt it now in support of the 2017 monitoring processes. So, for example, to start using it for the Q2 monitoring, which is coming up in July. Or to wait until the planning processes kick off for 2018 and to start really fully using it for the 2018 cycle. We'd like to encourage as many countries as possible to consider being early adopters, because there's quite a few advantages to that. Firstly, adopting it for monitoring is, in our experience, easier and more straightforward than adopting it for planning. There's less resistance and more, already established buy-in and demand for it. And secondly, if you're early adopters, you're going to be able to benefit from much more hand-holding and support from us, and a lot of your feedback and comments and requests for additional features or for things to be changed, we are much more likely to be able to get to them quickly and to integrate this kind of requests sooner rather than later. So if you want to be more involved in what the tool does and to make sure that you benefit as much as possible from us being there to help you, then early adoption is a good idea. But even if you adopt it later, we'll always ensure that there is fully backstopped HQ support. So just as there is a help desk for OPS that you use here, there will also be help desks, and there'll be trainings and so on. So on that note, I'd like to pass it over to Mark, who will give you a little bit of a background on the experience that he's had during the pilot, in Palestine, and to explain a little bit what the next steps and the way forward would be for those of you who are interested in finding out more. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Nick. So, as Nick said, I'm going to talk first a little bit about the piloting process that led us to the point we're at now, and then I'll move on to talk about the rollout support that we can offer to those of you who are interested in early adoption at mid-year or in the run-up to mid-year, or even sooner if that's appropriate to your context. So we started developing RPM in the summer of 2016. Sorry, in the summer of 2015, and we agreed with colleagues in OPT to start piloting there from their HRP workshop onwards. That was in October of 2015. And at that point, the tool was only capable of managing the plan elements, so strategic objectives, cluster activities, and the associated indicators. And we didn't yet have the flexible structure which Anwar has shown in the presentation earlier. So it wasn't possible to really closely tailor the application to the specific needs of the plan. We'd worked with OPT in the run-up because we very much, and they very much expected to be using the standard HRP template. Of course, at the HRP workshop, they decided in country to do away with the concept of cluster objectives. So immediately it became clear how important it is for us to support customization. The tool as it is now allows you to really tailor the UI which your cluster contacts will be entering the data in to the exact framework that you're using. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case at the time, so we had to tell people to, skip a screen, and it worked, but it wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. Between November, when they finalized their plan, and the end of the first quarter of last year, we worked on adding monitoring features to the tool, and those were ready more or less in a kind of a jury-rigged initial, not particularly stable implementation by the end of the first quarter of 2016. And we rolled out monitoring in Jerusalem and Ramallah, and I visited each of the cluster coordinators and trained them together with colleagues from the IMU in the Jerusalem office. And we successfully managed to get all of the data into the application, and colleagues working in the OCHA office then selected those indicators that they wanted to use in a dashboard and produced a dashboard that went to the HCT. Over the next several months after that, between the end of the first quarter last year and the end of the second quarter last year, we focused on improving the data entry process for monitoring data. And that meant that when I returned to Jerusalem in July of last year, the data entry process went a lot smoother. We had a lot of, again, much like at the end of the first quarter, a lot of feedback from both from the OCHA office as well as from cluster focal points, and where they had them, also cluster IMs. But the feedback was more positive and mostly related to feature requests and suggestions for improvement. And since then, since the end of since the mid-year monitoring, so since last July, our efforts have focused on integrating all of the feedback that we received, and as Anwar said, working on this fully flexible plan framework. So that's where we're at now. Now, in terms of the lessons that we learned from the rollout, what I found very, very interesting was that encouraging all of the clusters and the OCHA office to work together in a platform led to conversations about data standards, which even in this context where the clusters have been well established for a long time, there's been regular data exchange between OCHA and clusters for really many years. Nonetheless, there were conversations that took place that were spurred by the fact of the platform. For example, it became clear during data entry in the first quarter that the different clusters had very different ideas about disaggregation. For example, some clusters used the separate categories that Anwar showed off in the disaggregation tool within the system. So male, female, children, adult, whereas others would use combination categories, i.e. girl, boy, adult, female, adult, male. And this, of course, makes it very, very difficult to add values together across clusters to get a national picture. And the fact that they were all sitting in the same front end, that they weren't using Excel sheets which they could easily edit, made it impossible to avoid these conversations, and led, I think, to a better understanding of each other's picture in terms of data. So that was really quite serendipitous. It was also very useful for us because it allowed us to integrate a huge amount of feedback. One of the improvements that we made was integrating a module called Hands-on Table, which allows, if you're not importing an Excel sheet, to nonetheless be able to copy and paste whole columns worth of data, which of course allows you to streamline the workflow a lot. As for the support that we can offer going forward, Nick mentioned a moment ago that while we envisage all offices adopting the tool from the end of this year for the 2018 plans, we're now ready to support offices who are interested in early adoption. So the way we imagine that this will go is that a number of you will talk about it in your IMWGs, ICCGs, with your heads of office, and where a consensus is reached to adopt the tool, we will be ready to support you to do that. And that support will consist, as we see it now, although we're very willing to discuss exactly how we should organize it with you, but our initial plan is to start off with a call between yourself as the head of IM and whoever in your IMU you want to join that call with Anwar and myself. Anwar is the kind of technical project manager, and myself as I'm responsible for all the field support. At that call, we'll give you a very in-depth demo of the tool. So not just the greatest hits that Anwar was able to squeeze into his 25-minute segment of this webinar, but a very detailed demo, as detailed as you need it to be in order to be able to make a decision. And we'll also provide you with access to our demo site, where you can create plans, create disaggregation models, play around, etc. From then on, we'll analyze the requirements of your planning context. We've looked at most of your HRPs already, and we'll come to agreements with you on how we get the plan input into the system, how we divide the labor on that, and agree on training and support capacity. Now, here it'll very much depend on whether you intend to first do a kind of a closed pilot within your office, with the cluster still submitting the information to you as they have in the past, or whether you're ready to go out and use the tool with clusters entering data for themselves. Obviously, whether we provide information and training and capacity only to support you or also directly to your cluster contacts depends on that decision, and is very much guided by your wishes, because we recognize fully that depending on the context, relationships between OCHA and the clusters can be of varying quality, and we recognize that it is primarily your responsibility to manage those relationships, so we won't get ahead of any of that, and we'll only be reaching out to them with your agreement. And where we want to end up with the support is that your plan is populated on our live site, everything is entered correctly, and monitoring data collection can start. So that's how we imagine that the rollout support will go. I'm encouraged to see in the chat that a number of you seem quite enthusiastic. I think when I hand over to Nick in a moment, he's going to ask for something like a show of hands for who of you we should get in touch with promptly. I also just very briefly want to mention that there's another 20 minutes or half hour or so at the end of the call for those of you who want to have more detailed discussions about aspects of the tool that we weren't able to get into during the demo. So with that, I'd like to give you back to Nick.
Thank you very much, Mark. So we're almost at the end of our hour-long session. As I said, we can stay on longer for questions, but please keep your questions coming. So if you've got any questions, please type them into the chat window. At this point, as Mark said, so the next step for us is to get in touch with you bilaterally if you guys want more information. So it's absolutely no commitment. We're not at the moment asking whether you want to or when you want to adopt this or how you want to adopt this. We're more simply interested in knowing who we should contact over the next few days to set up another conversation bilaterally where we can give you a much more detailed technical demonstration where we can start talking about what your particular situation is in your country, what your needs are, and what might be a good way forward that works for you. So if you're interested in that, please just type in yes, the word yes into the chat window, and we know who you are, so we'll be getting in touch with you by email shortly after in the next few days. So that's just to remind you just to type in yes, and we'll get in touch with you. Now, before we wrap it up, I wanted to touch briefly on one thing that has come up a few times, which is how this works with OPS. So as both Anwar and Mark have said several times, this is not the RPM tool is a cluster level tool. So it's not for individual partners to use, it's for cluster coordinators to use and for OCHA to use to manage the information at the cluster level. How that works in practice is if clusters have their own tools to use to collect monitoring data from their individual partner agencies and organizations, they will continue to use those own tools, and then that data will be aggregated, and then it will go into RPM. So the preferred way of working is essentially that at the beginning of the year, everyone uses RPM to create the definitive plan framework and collaborates around it. And then that framework is passed on automatically to any cluster level tools or to the grant management system of the country-based pool funds that needs this kind of information. And then thereafter, the monitoring is as it is now, the monitoring responsibility is primarily with the clusters. OCHA asks the clusters to report back, and the clusters will either do so using their own systems, which will then exchange the data into RPM. So they then just have to log into RPM. They already see their data. They just click on approve. Or if there is a gap there, and if the cluster doesn't have its own system, then the cluster will go and enter this information directly into RPM. Now, the same logic will apply to OPS. So we're going to completely get rid of the existing online project system and replace it with a completely new one. And that's going to happen over the course of this year and next. And that will continue to be a partner-level tool where partners enter their projects at the beginning of the year to support project-based planning. But it will go beyond that, and it will then become a 3W implementation tracking tool so that OCHA will manage all of the 3W information consistently through one new tool that is essentially the new OPS. So people will put in proposals for projects, and then during the year, they will keep those updated. And how that works is, again, if clusters tools exist to manage that for an individual cluster, then those cluster tools will be used at the front line, and then that data will automatically go into the new OPS for you to be able to compile your 3W reports. But the key thing here is that what we end up with between the RPM tool and the new OPS tool and the financial tracking tool, FTS, is a completely integrated suite where all of this data talks to each other and connects to each other, so we can actually see here are the needs, here are the indicators that we're tracking for the needs, here is the response, and these are how the response lines up with those needs. Here's the planning and the monitoring of that response. Here's the money that we're receiving. Here are the projects that are helping us achieve these activities and objectives. So like at the moment, you have to assemble all of that manually to do your gap analyses and to do your dashboards and so on. And the idea is that we can actually make that happen automatically and make your jobs much easier, and also make it much easier for strategic decision makers to understand what's going on and to make good decisions. We're going to move on now to answering some questions. There seems to be a whole bunch from Christian. Just to remind you, everyone, to write in yes if you want us to contact you. So to answer some of Christian's questions, how do we make sure when agencies declare their tools as a cluster tool, it has been approved or adopted by the majority of the cluster partners? So I agree, in practice, it's not just been OCHA, it's also been the agencies that sometimes get a little bit zealous about these tools. But right now, because we're working so closely with these agencies, we can also see that a lot of not just the technical work is aligned, but a lot of the political work is also aligning. So that we're not, neither us, OCHA, nor any of the agencies like UNICEF and UNHCR are going in heavy-handed to say, oh, now everyone from tomorrow must use this new tool. But they're being very cautious to understand what's out there and to develop things that actually work for the field, that actually improve the situation for the field, and to get much more of an iterative approach going, so that we're not going out there with a fully fledged tool, but we're going out there with something that works, but something that we can iteratively improve after we have you guys starting to use it and getting the feedback to see these are things that we need to change, or we need to add, or we need to get rid of or do differently. And that, because that process, we see that process happening as well with the clusters, we're much more confident that we can move together, move forward together to achieve a good outcome. UNICEF is the big player here because they are developing this eTools platform, and they have already essentially got an agreement politically across all of the UNICEF managed and led clusters to adopt this platform. UNHCR, already 2 of the 3 clusters that UNHCR is responsible for are also going to be adopting eTools, and the third, protection, is also very likely to do so. So if that happens, then you may well have a situation where 5 or 6 clusters in the field are using the same cluster level tool, and that will be interacting completely with the HPC tools that OCHA will be doing at the intercluster level. The remaining missing links are the health cluster and the food security cluster, and there are some tools that they've been thinking of or under development, and we're working closely with them to encourage them to consider more along the lines of what UNICEF is doing or UNHCR is doing, what the best way forward is. So, does anyone else have any other questions? No? Okay, so we're just about 6 minutes past 11, so let's wrap it up here. I'd like to pass it over, well, just to remind you again, if you are interested in us getting in touch with you or your country offices, completely no obligation, just for you to be able to ask more questions, to have a more detailed demo, no commitment at all, then please just type in yes into the window and we'll get in touch with you. Otherwise, I would like to pass it back over to Craig to wrap up the session.
Great.
Oh,
Thanks, Nick.
sorry, Craig. Mark is just saying that there's a last question.
Okay.
Okay. As part of, is there a general plan?
It's from Joseph in Manila.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, this is a very good question. So we're saying, is there a section in the RPM tool that we can generate a plan for a contingency or a pro forma flash appeal? So in the case of emergency, we just go in and edit the flash appeal to suit the ongoing emergency scenario. So absolutely yes. So first of all, the RPM tool, what you've seen today is sort of aligned with what a typical HRP looks like. But as Anwar was showcasing, it's so flexible that it can actually be used for any type of plan, for any purpose, and for any form of the plan. As long as there's some kind of a log frame, it can be used. Now, in terms of preparing the groundwork for actually launching when you go into a sudden onset emergency, there's two things we can do. First of all, we can already create standard templates for what a flash appeals typically looks like, so that when you go in there, you don't have to decide, oh, are there going to be strategic objectives and are there going to be cluster objectives and so on. It's all ready to go, and you can immediately make it available for people to plug in their indicators. Second, if we want, we can go one step further and not just create a template for what sort of a blueprint for the plan, but we can actually create a sort of ready-to-go copy of a plan, of a generic plan, where we've already got some standard objectives and some standard activities and some standard indicators in there. So we can really hit the ground running and just say, okay, let's make a copy of this plan, adjust the few of the indicators we need and so on, and away we go. So absolutely yes, and actually we're very much hoping that this tool will be useful and used in situations of preparedness, not just in sort of your ongoing emergencies. Okay, so sorry, Craig, that's back over to you.
Okay, great. Well, I don't really have much to add other than to say thanks to Nick and Warren Mark for organizing the WebEx and for everybody joining from the field. And obviously, this product and other ones being developed by TSB will be integrated into future impact and other trainings, and we're really looking forward to sharing that with you. So thanks for dialing in, and hope to talk to you again.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. That wraps up this session. We've been recording it, and we'll be posting it to YouTube over the next few days. I've noted the yeses in the chat, and we'll be reaching out to you directly. Thank you very much, everyone, and that wraps the session. Okay, Joseph, I've got you. Good.